As we're learning today in our modern world, nearly everything is connected, and some of those connections may be surprising. Our next speaker is going to highlight the link between deforestation and our food and clothes. He brings a wealth of experience to this subject as a senior manager at the National Wildlife Federation, where he leads the National Wildlife Federation's work in South America to decouple agricultural production from deforestation. Please join me in welcoming Simon Hall to the screen.
Thanks so much, Jay. Let me bring up my slides here. Okay, great. Hopefully you all can see them. So it's great. It's really a pleasure to be speaking with you all today. I had an opportunity to jump on and hear some of the previous speakers, and it's really just a phenomenal lineup and great information here. So as Jay mentioned, I'll be talking about deforestation and links to food and clothing, just a few of the topics that we'll cover in this brief 15 minutes together here today. I want to just introduce the National Wildlife Federation for those who may not know, talk about sort of how we sort of situate all of these issues from a global context, jump right into the major drivers of deforestation globally, and then how those are linked to different consumer products, and then share with you a few sort of key takeaways from our perspective, and then leave you with a couple of action points that would encourage you to consider for yourselves and for your networks. So National Wildlife Federation, for those who may not be familiar with us, we were established in 1936, which makes us, we just had our 85th birthday, which makes us one of the oldest and largest wildlife conservation and education organizations. We have over 6 million members and supporters. We've been working outside of the US for over 30 years. And the core areas of our work outside the US really center around trying to advance, smart, viable, real world solutions that can de-link agricultural production from deforestation and land use change. We have a variety of different sort of programs through, within our organization, including our eco schools, certified wildlife habitat, and then a range of our flagship education materials, including National Wildlife Magazine, Ranger Rick Jr., zoo books for some of you may be familiar with those or have benefited from those growing up. I know I certainly did. So let's, so with that and sort of brief introduction, let's kind of just jump straight into it. And so, what is the context for all of this? We're really looking at a hungry world, and I think this is sort of been underscored by a few of the previous speakers. So, current world population is right around 7.8 billion. It's only projected to go up from that. Some estimates put it just shy of 10 billion over the coming decades by about 2050, mid-century mark. And with that, we're also, there's also projections for a much larger global middle class. And so by roughly 2030, it's estimated that maybe 2.5 billion more people could be joining this middle class. And what does that mean? That means both you have sort of increases demand for food, but also shifts towards richer diets. And that's the trend that we're currently seeing. And so in the context of how we feed billions of people, the logical sort of conclusion that we draw is that increased demand for more food and richer diets will be met by increased agricultural production, as well as reductions in loss and waste, which is a really critical component of the equation that I wanted to mention. But this presentation, these couple slides and this talk, and hopefully some good Q&A towards the end, is really going to focus on the production increases and how that is linked up to deforestation and competition for land. And so we basically have this question, okay, we're going to have more people, these more people will need more food, more clothing, more products. So how are we going to meet that need? How will production increase? Will it increase through a sustainable channel by increasing yields, recovering degraded lands that already exist, and more efficiently using these current production areas? Or are we going to follow a trajectory of unsustainable development and growth where we encroach further into forest frontier areas, we cause more deforestation, and the result is more ecosystem destruction and degradation. And so we're sort of at this crossroads now, and which sort of path are we going to follow collectively as sort of a global agricultural system? And part of this, and some of the, and this has been mentioned by others, is in the backdrop of climate change. So, and how do we, and so from our perspective, the key question here is how do you build resilience into this more sustainable trajectory that we hope we take? Agriculture is obviously extremely sensitive to climate change, probably one of the most sensitive sectors. Deforestation can obviously have a sort of a feedback loop associated with the ecosystem services. If you remove a rainforest, you can remove the rainfall patterns and the ecosystem services that regulate rainfall, temperature, etc. That's not always so good for producing more food to meet higher demand. And so there's all these sort of connections and interconnectedness that exists here. And so when we think about these two pathways, and we're sort of, our work really is driving towards more sustainable solutions to help build in additional resilience, prevent some of these productivity rollbacks that we may see in the wake of climate change. And as we sort of start to dive into this, we're going to take a look more closely in the next couple of slides here about deforestation more specifically and how it's linked to major agricultural commodity production in different parts of the world. And so if we were to sort of just pull back, and I think there's a lot of different sort of takes around these kind of numbers, but if we added up all the deforestation, the emissions associated with them, and measure them in terms of countries, it would be the third largest emitter in the world, behind China and the US. And so this is the significance of this globally speaking. You have not only the removal of the forest and the biodiversity impacts that has, you have it's often being burned, as we heard from some of the previous speakers. And so this is having sort of a double whammy effect. Not only do we lose the trees and the forest that was absorbing carbon dioxide and sequestering that and providing a suite of ecosystem services and biodiversity and habitat, et cetera. But now we're losing that and then emitting it through the burning. And so this is having a double whammy effect. And then sometimes the agriculture that is replacing that forest is not always being done in a sustainable way, having sort of a third sort of whammy to all of that. That's the bad news, but there is good news, as there should always be, hope and a light at the end of the tunnel. And so as we think about sort of this totality of global emissions linked to tropical deforestation, we also see that the land sector and forests can provide a incredible amount of the potential climate solution that's needed. And so while 8% of emissions may be linked to deforestation, a lot of researchers look at the forest as being able to potentially provide up to 23% of the climate solution. So it's obviously a huge challenge, but there's also on the same sort of other side of that coin, a huge opportunity for much needed solutions here. So let's take a look at sort of deforestation, emissions. How does this link into some major commodities? So basically, as we look across the deforestation landscape and where this is happening, approximately 80% of it is linked to agriculture. And there are a wide range of different forms of that agriculture can take, but predominantly there are four major forest risk commodities that are typically linked to the bulk of the deforestation and conversion that we're currently seeing. And those include cattle for beef and leather, mostly, but also other co-products, soy, palm oil, pulp and paper, and then there are some other sort of secondary sort of group of different commodities like cocoa and rubber and other types of things, and I'll talk briefly about those a little bit later. But let's take a little bit of a closer look at these four major forest risk commodities and how they link to our everyday products. And basically, if you have cattle, soy, palm oil, pulp, paper, timber products, and other things linked to deforestation, so that means we're clearing out a rainforest and putting cows there, If those commodities and that agricultural production is linked to deforestation, is linked to loss of habitat, then the products that come out of those systems can be linked to all of these negative things. And so that means that what's happening in some of these sort of often remote places of the world, or places that we may not think about in our everyday lives, can be connected to the food we eat, the products that we buy. And it's actually a wide range of products that that may not always be entirely sort of obvious or intuitive to most. And so what we want to do is take a little bit within this presentation, a little bit of a closer look at some of those things. And from our perspective, the work that we're doing, and the work that we're doing with all of our local partners, we see this loss, this deforestation, and replacing it with agriculture as really unnecessary and avoidable. And so why? Why? Because we have already a tremendous amount of land that is already dedicated to agriculture. There's huge opportunities for efficiency gains to improve yields, to improve the offtake rate. And so this notion that we need to continue to destroy our forests and our natural capital to produce food, sort of fallacy that we're trying to overcome through education and through collaboration and engagement. So let's take a closer look at some of these major commodities here. So the first one up is cattle. This is hands down the leading global driver of deforestation and habitat conversion. It's probably the one of the most significant challenges in South America. It's probably the number one sustainability challenge facing beef and leather sort of industries in this part of the world. But it can also have, can also contribute to some of these sustainability challenge and land use sort of processes, land use change processes in other parts of the world, such as North America, Africa, Australia. Cattle tend to be on relatively extensive, low productivity with a large yield gap. This is sort of speaks to some of the opportunities there are to improve how this is done and how it can be done in a more sustainable way. And to the right here on this slide, you see some of the products, some of which are very obvious: burgers and steaks, jerky. Some may be less obvious, like upholstery for leather that is used in vehicles or in couches, shoes, handbags, even pet food, and a lot of soaps from tallow or Jello, which also uses some of the collagen and tallow in it. So there's a huge range, and we didn't even have the space to put up all of the different sort of products that can potentially be either produced or include ingredients from cattle. It's quite diverse. So let's leave the cattle world and look at soy for a second. So soy is also a major driver of deforestation conversion. Again, it's also a huge challenge in South America. Most soy is actually used for feed, is a feed input for other forms of livestock, predominantly chicken, pigs, and farmed fish. And so you have most of it taking the form of this soy meal, and that's the vast majority, about 80% of it. So most of it is not going into oils and tofu and edamame and these kind of things. Most of it is going to feed livestock. It's typically one of the highest value crops. It's typically done on sort of a large scale. You don't often have sort of the quintessential smallholder soy farms. It's not something that we see a lot of evidence for, whereas you would see that in some of the other commodities: cattle, palm oil, cocoa, those types of things. And it does tend to sort of follow the sort of more traditional agricultural production systems: large scale, monocultured, relatively high degree of inputs and relatively high levels of productivity. However, there are opportunities to increase yields really across the board in soy and in these other commodities. So with that, let's palm oil and switch gears from South America to some other regions of the world that are facing some challenges around deforestation related to palm oil production. And this is most really centers around Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, particularly, where palm oil is a leading driver of deforestation. We're also starting to see some more recent emergences of palm oil in South America, as it also has sort of advantageous growing conditions in that part of the world. It's important to note that palm oil, while it is a major driver of deforestation, is also one of the most highly productive vegetable oils in the world. And so we'll talk about this in some of our recommendations. While it can cause problems, it can also be tremendously advantageous and beneficial. And so this keeping these kind of things in balance is really, really important as we try to think about solutions here. Palm oil is kind of ubiquitous in a lot of different products, and there's some estimates that it's found in 50% of all packaged goods in supermarkets. Everything from biofuels to soaps to ice cream to baked goods to shampoos, toothpaste, and cosmetics. It's really sort of given its properties and high heat sort of properties. It's really found in a lot of different applications, food, cosmetics, and personal care. The fourth one here on the list is pulp and paper. It's also a major driver. It's one of the big four. It's a big challenge in some parts of Southeast Asia as well as North America. We've seen quite a bit of plantations more recently over the last sort of several decades or so, are starting to grow more in South America. Tropical conditions, trees grow faster, the cycle happens faster, it's more profitable. It makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. And so we're starting to see that and the competition for land also. And these are a variety of products that you see here on the right that are associated with pulp and paper type of operations. Many of these are probably quite familiar to you. Everything from paper that we use to write on to toilet paper, packaging, especially in the days and age of Amazon and Alibaba, and what we sort of receive to our homes in terms of packaging is also a really important driver of this. The last one I wanted to include was cocoa here. So it's not one of the typically included in the big four, but it's also really important. It's a major driver of deforestation, and it's mostly an issue in the western portion of Africa. That's where about 2/3 of world's cocoa production is concentrated. It's more specifically in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And this is one of the commodities where you see a really high prevalence of smallholders. And so you don't have the big kind of plantations like you would expect to see in soy. It's a completely different kind of production system here. And this is obviously, a critical for chocolate, for a variety of different sort of baked goods, cocoa powders, other types of things that we all love and enjoy every day. But what we don't think about all the time is, where is that coming from? Where does that cocoa come from? How is it being produced? And is it, causing a negative impact on the planet? And hopefully, through this presentation can help provide a little bit of insights into that, and where some of these things ultimately come from and what impact do they have. So that, I think, are the four plus the cocoa commodities that I wanted to just briefly sort of run through. And then I just wanted to leave you with a few sort of key takeaways in some of the final slides here. So the first one, agriculture can be done in good ways. It can be done in really bad ways. So one of the things that I've taken away from this work and what we've seen is that you can't just have like this simple cancel everything kind of notion. And we often hear this kind of, very overly simplified approach. Oh, palm oil causes deforestation. Palm oil is bad. Cancel palm oil. Well, palm oil can be done bad. It can be done good. It's also one of the most productive oils in the world. So replacing it with something else may actually require us to use more land and to create greater competition between agriculture and forests and other types of land uses to be able to produce an equivalent amount. So there's all these very complicated trade-offs that we need to be very thoughtful about. And so there's always a good way and a bad way of going about things. And so that sort of that complexity is just inherent in all of this. So be mindful about that. We can't just cancel everything because it has been done in a bad way. Are there opportunities to do things better? There's also, oftentimes these conversations about climate and deforestation can be quite negative. I think there is a lot of good news, and so there is a real sort of optimism that is real, and there's a huge possibility to increase the production to meet the demand that we see now and into the future without having to deforest more, convert more, lose more habitat. that is possible. So those win-win solutions are real. They exist. They exist on paper. They exist in the real world. And what we really need are sort of more thought leaders, the sort of the next wave of sort of critical thinker and solution sort of providers to help realize and bring those types of things to life. I heard some of the earlier presenters talking about this. It's really about traceability and transparency. You can't manage what you can't see. And so being able to have better traceability, stronger transparency, more information, those are really some of the keys that will unlock a lot of the challenges, both related to deforestation, but related to a lot of other climate issues. We're seeing a lot of promising trends. Consumers and companies are increasingly demanding action, and not just action, but the results. So, what is the outcome associated with those actions? How are we tracking them? How are we reporting on that? And we're seeing really good, at least sort of a trend moving in the right direction. And then for consumers, you ultimately have the ability every day through our purchases to vote with your wallet. So you have a choice to buy products that meet credible sustainability standards, that meet your expectations, and don't just sort of blindly throw money at whatever you have too much uncertainty about what that's associated with, what's that linked to, does that sort of match my core values and what I believe in and what I want to see in terms of the future. So those are some 6 key takeaways, and then I'll more specifically jump into some suggestions in terms of what we think could be interesting for you all to consider in terms of how, if you were to want to act on this, how could you go about that? What's one sort of option that you have? The one thing that we know to be true, and we see a lot of evidence of, the more companies hear about the importance of sustainability issues, whether it's from climate to deforestation, the more that they hear about that from the people who buy their stuff, the more that they're going to be willing to act, and the more that they will act in a sustainable way that matches the values of their consumers. And so, as an individual, what are some things that you could do? Well, you could send a message, could be an email, could be a tweet, could be a DM, could be whatever you want to your local supermarket, one of your favorite brands, anybody that you buy a product from. Ask them where they source their stuff from, what they're doing to address deforestation, how are they improving on their sustainability, what are they doing about climate, whatever kind of question that you want. um, we know a lot of groups that do this, and one of the pro tips that we have is, if you want better results, find a specific person to message to, and try to find a specific product to call out as part of that, and then ask for more information, and then take that. What did you learn? What did you talk about? What did you find? And bring that to your friends and family. Spread that through social media. Spread that through your network. I'm seeing Jay come up here, so I must be coming to time. So I'll just leave you with this final slide. I think you probably heard this come through as a theme. There is complexity. The world is complex. Deforestation is one of a very complicated issue and involves social, environmental, economic factors all sort of clashing together. Sustainability is something we're all shooting for, but it can be quite elusive. And so as you sort of work on these challenges and work on other things in your lives, I would just encourage you to embrace the challenge and embrace the complexity. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for taking what seems to be a fairly complex topic and actually making it understandable, and to leave us with these really kind of inspirational words at the end.